The air reeked of decay and desperation as the Black Death clawed its way through 14th-century Europe, streets choked with corpses and prayers. Amid the screams, a whisper lingered, an ancient prophecy etched in Latin foretelling a shepherd in danger. It was as if Saint Malachy, the enigmatic 12th-century Irish bishop, had peered through time's veil and seen the horror unfolding. Who was this mystic, whose cryptic verses, 112 haunting phrases known as the Prophecy of the Popes, seemed to map humanity's darkest hours? Born in 1094, Malachy was no ordinary cleric. Legends claim he collapsed into visions, his quill scrawling enigmatic titles for future pontiffs. From the labor of the sun, the burning fire, religion laid waste. Skeptics dismissed them as forgeries, yet centuries later his words clung to history like shadows. When Clement VI reigned during the plague's peak, his papal motto, "Shepherd in danger," felt less like coincidence and more like a curse. Had Malachy foreseen the Church's impotence as bodies piled high? Or was it mere chance, a trick of hindsight? The questions gnawed, unresolved. Then came the Avignon papacy, a scandalous exile of popes to France in the 1300s, Malachy's label. For Clement V, exiled in Babylon? Babylon, the biblical symbol of corruption and displacement? Coincidence or divine mockery? The Church splintered, faith frayed, and Malachy's prophecies gained a sinister gravity. By 1517, as Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door, igniting the Protestant Reformation, another of Malachy's phrases loomed, "the burning fire." Flames consumed Europe, wars of faith devouring millions. The bishop's words, once dismissed as medieval ramblings, now felt like a script. Centuries rolled on, each crisis echoing his verses, the French Revolution's guillotines, World War II's ashes, even the shock of a pope's resignation in 2013. Was it all a cosmic game, or had a long-dead saint glimpsed the threads of fate? The answer flickers in the dark, just out of reach, a tantalizing blend of myth and menace. Where history and prophecy bleed into one, the 14th century dawned under a sky heavy with foreboding. In 1309, as the papal court fled Rome's crumbling streets for the gilded cages of Avignon, France, whispers of Saint Malachy's prophecy slithered through the corridors of power. Exiled in Babylon. The phrase was no mere metaphor, too. The faithful Babylon conjured images of decadence and divine punishment, a kingdom built on hubris, destined to fall. And so it did. Pope Clement V, a puppet of the French crown, presided over a papacy steeped in scandal. The Holy See, once the spiritual heart of Christendom, became a political pawn, its authority rotting like unburied relics. The Church splintered. Rival popes claimed legitimacy, their tiaraed heads spitting anathemas across Europe. Peasants and princes alike wondered, had Malachy, that shadowy Irish seer, truly foreseen this unraveling? Or was his prophecy a self-fulfilling curse, a mirror held up to the Church's own corruption? The lines between divine judgment and human folly blurred. Avignon's palaces, opulent and isolated, became symbols of a faith adrift of Babylonian exile, not just from Rome but from grace itself. 2 centuries later, the scent of smoke returned. In 1517, as Pope Leo X, a Medici prince draped in silk, commissioned Michelangelo to build saints' tombs, a penniless monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a Wittenberg church door. The act was a spark in a powder keg. Malachy's label for Leo X, the burning fire, flames devoured Europe. Luther's heresies spread like wildfire, scorching the Vatican's grip on souls. Peasants revolted, kings seized church lands, and altars crumbled under the weight of hypocrisy. The Reformation was no mere theological dispute. It was an inferno. Cities burned, martyrs screamed on pyres. The Catholic Church, once unshakable, fractured into warring shards of faith. Malachy's words now felt less like riddles and more like revelations, a script written in ash. Had the saint truly glimpsed Leo X's reign as kindling for chaos? Or did later generations, staring into the embers of war, force his verses to fit the carnage? The question lingers, unanswered. In the aftermath, Europe lay transformed. The Avignon exile had weakened the papacy. The Reformation nearly destroyed it. The wars of religion, a century of slaughter in God's name, reshaped kingdoms and consciences. Malachy's prophecies, once dismissed as medieval mysticism, took on a chilling afterlife. To believers, they were proof of heaven's hand steering history's wheel. To skeptics, they were clever retrofits, a game of cosmic mad libs played by the credulous. Yet the parallels refused to die. Avignon's Babylon and Luther's fire became bookends to an age of divine reckoning, where faith and power collided and the world burned. What threads bind these moments? Perhaps it is the human hunger to see patterns in chaos, to believe that even suffering has an author. Or perhaps Malachy's words, whether prophecy or parable, tap into truths deeper than fact, that empires rot from within, that fire follows decadence, and that history, in the end, is a haunted house. Every creak in its halls echoes with the whispers of those who claim to have seen what comes next. Asterisk, asterisk, the 14th century skies turned, ashen with God's silence. By 1347, the Black Death seeped into Europe like a curse, villages hollowed to bone in silence. In Avignon, Pope Clement VI, the shepherd in danger of Malachy's prophecy, presided over a flock dying mid-prayer. The church, once a bastion of divine order, unraveled. Priests fled their altars. Sacraments rotted in plague-struck chapels. Clement offered indulgences to the dying, sold absolutions to the rich, and begged God for mercy from a throne ringed by corpses. Malachy's phrase, scrawled centuries prior, now seemed less a warning than a verdict. Was the shepherd Clement himself, trembling as his lambs perished? Or was it Christendom's faith, gutted by a God who let infants blacken in their cradles? The Church's failure was apocalyptic. Half of Europe died. Survivors buried their dead in mass graves and their faith in doubt. Theologians raged. Was the plague divine wrath for human sin, or proof heaven had abandoned them? Malachy's prophecy offered no answers, only a chilling echo of despair. 3 centuries later, flames would answer. In 1666, as Pope Alexander VII polished Bernini's colonnades, Rome burned. The great fire devoured slums and palaces alike, its embers swirling like damned souls above the Tiber. Malachy's phrase for Alexander, "The glory of the olive," a baffling label until whispers arose. The olive, symbol of peace and divine favor, now reduced to cinder. Had God turned the holy tree into kindling? Some tied the fire to Alexander's excesses, his lavish art patronage, his nepotism, his hollow piety. Rumors spread of a nun's vision, a flaming olive branch falling from heaven, igniting Rome as punishment for Vatican greed. The blaze raged for days. When it died, the eternal city wore scars that mirrored its soul, fractured, soot-stained, haunted. Skeptics scoffed Malachy's phrase was likely a nod to the Olivetan monastic order, not prophecy. Yet, in the smoke, it was easy to see a pattern: plagues, fires, a God who punished with both pestilence and flame. What binds these catastrophes? The Black Death and the Great Fire, separated by centuries, shared a theology of terror. Both events forced humanity to its knees, not in prayer, but in primal fear. The Church, scrambling to explain divine wrath, found itself outmatched. Clement's indulgences could not cure the plague. Alexander's art could not quench the fire. Malachy's words, vague as they were, became a rope for the desperate to cling to, a way to believe suffering had meaning. Yet the glory of the olive remains a riddle. Was it a misread omen, a metaphor for peace consumed by hubris? Or a warning that even holiness burns? Perhaps the true prophecy was not in Malachy's words, but in humanity's hunger for them. When the world cracks open, whether by plague, fire, or war, we dig through ruins for signs we were warned. The shepherd in danger and the olive's glory are more than verses, they are mirrors. In them we see our dread of chaos, our need to blame kings and popes and gods for the horrors we cannot control. The Black Death and the Great Fire did not just kill bodies and burn cities. They exposed the fragility of belief. And in that exposure, Malachy's ghost lingers, a whisper that the next catastrophe, too, has already been foretold, waiting in the shadows of some future. Pope's reign, asterisk, asterisk. The 18th century ended not with a whimper, but with the roar of guillotines. In 1789, as Parisian mobs stormed the Bastille, Pope Pius VI of Malachy's roaming lion paced the Vatican like a caged beast. The Prophecies' irony was savage. The lion, symbol of papal majesty, now wandered powerless as revolutionaries tore his realm apart. France's streets ran red with sacred blood, priests butchered, churches looted, altars desecrated. By 1798, Pius VI himself was dragged from Rome in chains, a prisoner of the very republic that had once bowed to Rome's throne. The papal states dissolved, their maps burned in bonfires of Enlightenment fervor. Malachy's phrase, the roaming lion, took on a cruel double meaning. The pontiff, once Christ's vicar, became a spectral exile, his temporal power gutted. The Church's earthly empire, built over a millennium, crumbled in a decade. Was this the roaming Malachy foresaw? A lion declawed or a faith unmoored? The answer died with Pius in a French prison, his corpse smuggled out in secrecy. As if even in death, the prophecy demanded humiliation, but shadows deepen. A century and a half later, as Europe convulsed under another cataclysm, Malachy's words returned, darker, sharper. Pope Pius XII, dubbed religion laid waste. By the prophecy, sat ensconced in Vatican silence while trains rattled toward Auschwitz. The Holocaust industrial slaughter defied comprehension. 6 million Jews extinguished, cities reduced to ash, humanity's soul scorched. Pius XII, a diplomat to his core, chose muted diplomacy over thunderous condemnation. His defenders claimed pragmatism, his accusers spat complicity. Malachy's phrase, religion laid waste, curdled in the air. Was it the Nazis' war on faith, the Church's moral implosion? Or the haunting truth that even God's emissary could not stop the abyss? The questions gnawed like rats in the crypt. When Allied troops liberated the camps, they found survivors who'd carved crosses into barracks walls, a plea to a heaven that had gone mute. Pius XII's legacy remains a wound, a testament to prophecy's cruelest trick. It reveals not just what will happen, but what could have been. These twin collapses, 1789 and 1939, are bound by more than Malachy's verses. The French Revolution declared war on God. World War II revealed what a godless world could do. In both, the papacy stood at the precipice, its authority fractured, its morality questioned. The roaming lion and religion laid waste are not mere footnotes, but tombstones. They mark moments when faith, whether in divine right or divine mercy, buckled under history's weight. Yet Malachy's genius or his curse was to frame collapse as destiny. The revolution's chaos and the Holocaust's horror were not random, his followers whispered but ordained, etched into time by a saint's quill. Skeptics scoff, the prophecies are vague enough to fit any crisis, a parlor game for the paranoid. But consider this, the deeper truth may lie not in the words themselves, but in the terror they evoke. When Pius VI's bones moldered in a foreign grave, or when Pius XII's silence echoed over mass graves, Malachy's verses became a scream across centuries. You were warned, what lingers is the chill of pattern. The lion roams, religion lies waste, and the prophecies endure not because they predict, but because they resonate. They are keys to a lock that does not exist, yet somehow fits. In the end, Malachy's power is not in foreseeing doom, but in making us believe doom has an author, and in that belief perhaps lies the real shadow, the one we cast ourselves as we wander the ruins, searching for signs that our suffering was written, and not just born of our own hands. *****, the 20th century's final decades pulsed with omens. On May 13, 1981, Pope John Paul II, from the labor of the sun, collapsed in St. Peter's Square, blood blooming across his white robes as a would-be assassin's bullet struck. The date was no accident, the feast of Our Lady of Fatima, whose visions had warned of apocalyptic secrets. Born during a solar eclipse, Karol Wojtyła's life seemed scripted by Malachy's sun-drenched prophecy. His survival, attributed to divine intervention, transformed him into a miracle pope, a living relic in a secular age. Crowds wept at his resilience. Skeptics whispered of staged martyrdom. Yet the timing gnawed at the faithful. Had Malachi foreseen this moment, this dance of death and light? Then came the thunderclap no one expected. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI, a scholar steeped in tradition, shattered 6 centuries of precedent by resigning. Malachi's label for him? The glory of the olive branch, symbol of peace and monastic devotion, now seemed a bitter joke. Benedict's reign ended not in glory, but in scandal and exhaustion, the Vatican leaking secrets like a sinking ship, his own voice trembling as he surrendered the fisherman's ring. The church reeled. Was this the glory foretold? Pope humbled, an olive branch burned to ash? Or had Malachi's words like scripture bent to fit the rupture? Now the horizon darkens with Malachi's ultimate riddle, Peter the Roman. The prophecy's final line claims the last pope will reign amid chaos, shepherding the faithful as the world crumbles. No pontiff has taken the name Peter II yet. But in an age of climate collapse, AI ascendancy, and nuclear brinkmanship, the whispers swell. Conspiracy theorists dissect papal gestures. Doomsday cults stockpile supplies. Is Francis the Jesuit reformer a placeholder before the storm? Or will the next conclave anoint the doomed Peter, sealing humanity's epitaph? Malachi's text ends here in silence and suspense. The question hangs like a blade. Are these prophecies a map of destiny or a mirror for our dread? Either way, the clock ticks. And the sun, it seems, is always laboring toward eclipse. History is a labyrinth where shadows whisper, and Saint Malachy's prophecies are its most haunting echoes. Consider the threads. Clement V's papacy exiled to Avignon, a Babylon of gilded corruption as the church splintered. Pius XII's reign, where religion laid waste, curdled into ash as trains rolled toward Auschwitz, and the Vatican's silence smothered screams. Benedict XVI's abrupt fall from the throne, the glory of the olive wilting into a punchline for a papacy that ended not in martyrdom, but murmurs of failure. These moments, stretched across centuries, pulse with a rhythm too precise to ignore a drumbeat of doom that Malachi's verses seem to conduct. Yet for every true believer who sees divine choreography, the skeptic snarls. Coincidence. Post-dated interpretations, they argue, are a parlor trick. Malachi's phrases, vague, poetic, malleable, are not prophecies but prisms, fracturing light to fit any disaster. The Babylonian Exile, a convenient metaphor, Pius XII's moral collapse, retroactive guilt, Benedict's resignation, a desperate lunge to make olive mean anything. The truth, they insist, is simpler. Humanity is a pattern-seeking animal, clawing at the void for meaning, but what if the void claws back? What chills is not the prophecy's accuracy, but their uncanny resonance, the way they fuse to history's fractures like molten iron. When John Paul II, the labor of the sun, bled on Fatima's feast day, or when Francis now shoulders the weight of Peter the Roman amid climate collapse and AI ascendance, it feels less like prediction and more like possession. Malachi's words, forged or fated, tap into a primal truth. We crave narrative. Chaos terrifies not because it is random, but because it is not. The prophecies endure because they offer a scripta promise that even apocalypse has an author. In the end, Malachi's genius lies not in foresight but in folklore. His verses are campfire tales for the damned, stories we tell ourselves to soften the scream of the unknown. The church's exiles, the wars, the resignations, they are not proof of prophecy, but of humanity's refusal to wander alone in the dark. We stitch meaning from madness, divinity from disaster. And history, that sly raconteur, leans in, grinning, as the next chapter unfolds. The final twist? It was never about Malachi. It was always about us, the desperate, the devout, the doubters, all. Turning the page, forever wondering if the last line will read the end.